Welcome back to Ink and Ecstasy with Liz and Grimm. We hope you've been enjoying the reviews and getting to know us a little. Now we're going to get into a topic on writing, and it's one that I think we both feel is fairly important to good storytelling. Today we're going to be discussing characters and characterization. All right, Grimm, why do you feel characters are such an important element in stories?
Well, characters are important because there's no story without them. You know,
True.
characters with personalities are absolutely pivotal to tell a good story.
Agreed. Yeah, for me, it's all about making a connection between the reader and the story itself. Without a good character to build on, the plot can get a little bit muddy because you're not quite sure what direction to go in with it. So yeah, in my opinion, you need at least some idea of who you're writing to know how they would react in the situations you're going to present them in order to advance the plot and keep it building toward a climax in a very consistent way.
Yeah, well, a lot of that can be done, prior to writing, or some of
Now
it
when you're
can
a
be done,
pantser.
well,
Like I said, we have two different writing styles. You plan. I say fuck that shit and just go with it.
I was trying to say that there were multiple ways to do it. Yeah, sure, you can do that before you actually start writing, which is kind of how it sounded like you were saying was the ideal way to do it.
Yes and no, but it's just in having an idea of who the character is. Said this before, but once I sit down to start writing, I usually don't have anything in mind. The first thing that I build is the character, and that's not intentional. It's just how it happens. The first line I ever write in a story is usually something about the character, the viewpoint of the character, the thoughts of the character, something along those lines. It's not the plot that starts. It's the character for me.
That's fair. Sometimes it is really interesting to have one very dominant personality.
Right. Or at least one very clear personality.
Yeah. I really think that you need at least one in order to have a good story, right?
Yeah.
Obviously you're going to want to develop the character.
Right.
That's always so interesting because I think people just want to see personal growth in a character.
Yeah, that is a big part of it. They love to see a character that, maybe starts off a little aloof.
Flawed
Yeah.
or flawed or yeah.
Yeah. And by the end of it, they've come around, they've learned their mistakes, they've experienced things that have helped them grow into becoming a better person. And I don't know about you, but for me, when I think of characters, I do think of people. I know they're not real, but it feels real when I'm writing it, if that makes sense. I don't know, it feels like I'm telling somebody's story and hearing it from them as I write it. That's probably weird, but yeah.
That kind of makes sense. I've had characters do stuff that I did not know that they were going to do until they
That
did it.
happens. That happens very often.
Yeah.
And it's like, no,
Yeah.
this is not how this is supposed to go. And like, and now I can't see any other way to write this because this makes sense.
That's something that, even though it's kind of annoying, I think, well, they know better than I do.
Yeah,
I
it's
don't know what I'm
organic.
doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very organic.
So I just let them do it and I don't fight
Yeah. Yeah.
it.
That is a little bit of pantser style.
Maybe. I guess what I'm thinking about is when, okay, so I don't know if I told you, but I had this story that I was working on a couple of weeks ago.
You told me.
The one with the bimbo?
Yep, you told me about it.
Yeah, okay, she was not meant to have a personality, but then she surprised the fuck out of me, man.
It happens.
She just started saying stuff, and I was like, where is this even coming from?
Yeah, I mean, it happens.
And then I just like, well, okay, I guess this is the way the story's gonna go. You
And the
know?
story is probably better off for it because that's one of those changes that kind of happens organically where you don't set out to make that change. You don't force it. It just happens.
Right.
So that actually leads us into another point. What does it mean for you when a character carries the story? Because that kind of leans into that. It's kind of the same idea as when your character takes over, they can tend to be the star of the story, if you will, because they do tend to carry the story when that happens. They become very noticeable. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, well, once a character is defined, the writer can basically let the character do whatever they might do naturally in a given scene.
Right.
So it kind of makes it easy for the writer to move the story along when the character is telling the writer what they should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
You
Definitely.
know?
Yeah, for me, it's like when a character carries the story, it means the characters are the focal point and the plot is secondary. It's like the plot
Yeah.
is a point to get the characters to grow. It's like that's its only purpose is to help the characters along.
It is interesting that characters can take the focus away from the plot, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah, they can become the focal point of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Because we actually read a story recently where that was the case, where the plot of the story was like, yeah, I don't really fucking care about that. I want to know what's going on with this character. Like,
Yeah.
this character is very interesting to me and I want to know more about them. Fuck all this stuff.
Right. I want to know more about his thoughts about sternums and chainsaws.
Yeah, exactly. So, how do you think a character can develop a connection between the reader and what's going on in the story?
I guess it's really all about believability, isn't it?
Yeah, ultimately.
It's kind of like when we watch a movie, we invest our emotions into the characters, right?
Mm-hmm.
When the villain of the story gets the upper hand on the hero just before the end, we go, oh no, right?
Right.
And then we're just like on the edge of our seats,
Mm-hmm.
hoping that everything works out, even though really in the back of our mind, like we know it's going to work out because villains don't usually win in movies, you know?
True.
It's just not something that normally happens.
But when that happens, I love it
Yeah.
because it subverts the whole idea of
Yeah.
it.
We can talk about subversion. Like we could do like a whole podcast
Oh,
on
yeah.
it.
That's fun.
So, like, if we're watching the greatest actor in the world, we'll be easily sucked into the story and it'll be hard to tune out, right?
Yeah.
But if we're watching the worst actor in the world, we're likely to quickly get bored because our suspension of disbelief has been shattered
Yeah.
and we'll stop watching, you know? And then
Yeah.
so it's the kind of same thing when we're reading a story, you know? It's basically just like a movie with fictional characters that only exist in our head,
Right. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And it's the same connection points there where the believability is the selling point.
Right.
And moving along, what is it that makes a character worth writing about? What is it that makes a character more than just words on a page?
Basically, when their motivations are made clear and their intentions for why they do what they do.
Okay. Have you ever had a character that wasn't the viewpoint character, like a main character who wasn't the viewpoint character?
Yeah.
I like that when that happens. I have one, A Nanny Secret. It's told from the viewpoint of the nanny, but the person the story is actually about is the wife and mother in the story. And I think I maybe did not get that across as well as I thought I might have. So that's what I kind of want to edit and redo to correct that because it is important to me that rather than the nanny being the main character, the wife and mother is the main character because it's her story ultimately.
Yeah, I have done something like that before. I just can't really remember offhand.
All right, next question. As far as the protagonist, antagonist, the characters that exist to push the plot forward, what is it that creates the dynamic between them?
It's really all about conflict, isn't it?
Ultimately, yeah.
I've found the secret ingredient for a good story, as I like to think of it, and that's when you match up two characters that have opposing motivating factors. You get the best conflict that way.
To me too, yeah. It's the same with me. I love a good conflict in a story, particularly when maybe the characters have the same ultimate goal, but because of their personalities, because of who they are and how we've written them, they have to go about getting to that goal in very almost opposing ways.
Oh, yeah, so you do have kind of a thing for enemies, don't you?
I do.
That is kind of an interesting point because I was going to say that I like it when there's personal growth and character development. And then at the very least, one of the characters thinks, oh, well, actually, I think I do like this person.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And then they come to have feelings for them. That's just more interesting to me than like starting off a story like, yep, I am a DTF what's her name over there, and I am going to make that happen. Nah, no thanks.
Yeah, there's no mystery there. There's no build up. It's just
Right.
here you go. So carrying on from that is where you mentioned growth. The difference between static and dynamic characters. How do you feel they contribute to building a good character? Because there can be something said about a static character still having some possibilities with interesting development, even if they don't grow as a person or as a character. But to you, what's the difference there, and what do you think builds a better character?
So this is really funny that you should mention this because the story that I'm writing right now, that I'm like 37K deep in right now,
Mm-hmm.
that I started writing last week, that I think I told you about
You did?
once or twice.
Or 5 times?
One of the characters is completely static, and it's the main character.
Okay.
He does not change throughout the entire story. And oddly enough, the other main character doesn't really change that much either. It's really just a little bit towards the beginning, but it's never really spoken about. It's kind of a read between the lines thing.
Yeah, I like those.
Yeah, there's really not much character development at all at that story because it's all erotic tension
Right.
from
Which
beginning
is
to end.
also a good thing.
Yeah, it can
Which
be.
we're going to
Yeah.
get into that a little later, but not at the moment. Have a few more things to go through first.
Okay. What else we got?
I want to talk about how characters are developed, like the best way to develop a character is, and how that can be through actions, dialogue, inner thoughts. How do you go about that?
Well, I mean, any of those are great as long as it's not omniscient narration,
Yeah.
you know? Actions, dialogue, and thoughts, that's like the only way that I care to even do it.
Yeah.
And it kind of feels wrong if I don't. I, for some reason, can't.
Yeah. To me, those are the things that make the character come to life. That's who they are, their voice, their mannerisms.
Doing it through dialogue is so fucking hard. But
Yeah.
when it happens, I'm like, yes.
Yes, definitely. Because sometimes you have a character that just says something that almost in that single sentence defines who they are.
Yeah,
And that can be so fascinating because you can build off that in so many ways.
right. That can really define them even more before you even know who they really are. Oh, but as far as thoughts go, though, I sometimes kind of feel like that's even cheating too, in a
Like inner
way.
thoughts.
Yeah, kind of like narration. With the inner thoughts, it's got to be done right.
Mm-hmm. With inner thoughts, it definitely needs to be something important that cannot be said out loud.
Right.
That is kind of a driving factor for the character. You have to show that conflict going on, the internal conflict, to use inner thoughts to develop the character.
Right.
I think you've done that with a few of your different stories too, with inner thoughts. I know you did that with reviving a kitten a little bit.
Yeah, I do that, but I don't like to focus on it, and it kind of feels cheap if I rely on it too much. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But you did rely on it in reviving a kitten. But to me, I read that as you kind of had to because, Fal is an alien who does not speak English.
Right. Well, I mean, language isn't really important. What that being was was
Mhm.
thinking was basically translated.
Right. But you also had a human character in there, and that would have been really hard to get across that he wasn't speaking English if you had just had him speak. You know what I mean? Because she would have understood him if he was speaking English. But if you were writing it in English,
Right.
that would have been really hard to translate that he's not speaking English, but we need to know what he's saying. So the inner thoughts there really played a big role in that and showing that he's not speaking the same language as the human girl. There's an inability to communicate.
What was interesting about that story was that there were several times where the woman she was she was speaking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but all that the alien heard was basically mewling, just kitten noises.
Right. Which, I mean, is probably why that term got used in the first place. They heard it somewhere, they associate it with weird noises.
Sorry, what?
The term kitten being, a very human term. I could see that being something that like an alien species would pick up on as, this is a being that we don't understand, but we like, so we're going to call it this.
I think it's like quite normal. Well, okay. So I'm just going to put it out there that I don't know of any alien species, but it kind of makes sense that any conscious being, they're going to be a little anthrocentric or xenocentric, I guess you could say, you know? They're going to be thinking about their species and the other species that they know. And they're going to be trying to
Make associations.
and make things fit, things that they don't understand. They're going to try and think about them in terms that they are familiar with. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah. That's where inner dialogue really helped with that story, because you could build out that they didn't speak the same language. He didn't understand what she was saying. She couldn't understand what he was thinking or saying. And you don't even know if he can speak until the very end
Right. Yeah. I don't know that there was really more than like two lines or maybe
of
three
dialogue.
lines of inner thought. Like,
Oh,
I don't think there was more than like three.
there were a few, because as you were going along with the guidebook, he was reacting with inner thoughts to some of those things, and that really built out the character a lot. Which that was just a clever way of doing that story.
That was a really fun one because it really came out in a white heat.
Yeah,
The words just flowed onto the page. And
yeah,
like 5 hours later, boom, done.
yeah. That's always a good way to do it. And actually, this brings us to archetypes, whereas you have someone like Val and the kitten who don't speak the same language. Neither one could really be called an antagonist or a protagonist. They couldn't be called a love interest because there was no real communication there. So they have this really interesting thing where they could actually be looked at as co-protagonists to a degree, even though one has a much more significant role in the story, which is Val. But yeah, I think that's fascinating because that leads us into that and how those kind of dynamics can shape the narrative structure in a story, because, it wasn't clear that one was good, one was bad. They were just different. So neither one was really bad or good. No, neither one was a hero or villain, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that was an interesting one because it didn't really fit with any of the main types of storytelling.
Right. Like I said, it was really cleverly done.
Well, apparently it was a little too clever for some people.
Yeah, we're not going to go into that though.
I do just want to point out that there's a human being on the cover.
There is that.
There are no felines whatsoever in the story,
No.
even though kitten is in the title. Weird, huh?
It's almost like kitten could be a pet name for a person.
Yeah, it's weird, huh?
Yeah, going along with the archetypes and shaping narrative structure and stuff like that. I wanted to get into this earlier because I kind of hit on it a little bit with enemies having the same kind of goal, but getting there in different ways. I think that's where this comes into play, of where the contrasting archetypes can build toward a structure in the narrative. One of the, I guess, at least for me, one of the most obvious examples of that, which I don't think you're into comic books that much. I don't think we haven't really talked about that. But this is gonna, I'm a little bit of a nerd and
Okay.
a comic book nerd, and
All right.
so my example in this is not in erotica, although I am positive there are some out there with these two characters, but Magneto and Professor X from the X-Men.
Who?
Magneto and Professor X, Charles Xavier from the X-Men.
X-Men?
X-Men.
And that's a comic book?
That is a comic book.
Oh, okay.
Um,
What about them?
so they have the classic antagonist protagonist archetypes kind of attached to them. Magneto is a bad guy.
Uh-huh.
Professor X is the good guy.
Uh-huh.
But they're also friends. They are
Oh,
each other's confidant. They both have this same goal of acceptance for mutant kind, but they both have very different views of how to get there. And this is kind of what I was, thinking about earlier when I mentioned that, of having characters that have a similar goal but different paths of getting there. Magneto's path is very destructive, and he would like to wipe out any humans that stand in the way of mutants being accepted and being able to live a peaceful life. Whereas Professor X feels that mutants and humans can coexist with enough time and patience being put into the situation. So these two characters are protagonists and antagonists. They fight against each other all the time. They are also confidants with each other because they've been pretty much lifelong friends, even though they are enemies. And they still they work together, they work against each other. And it is so interesting to me that you can have two characters that are supposed to be constant enemies, supposed to be very clear good and bad guys, who sometimes make the wrong choice. Like, there have been times when Professor X has made a choice that was against his normal path of attaining that goal, and Magneto has gone against his own instincts and saved people at times, which is something he would normally not do. And a part of that is the influence they have on each other. I just think that's a very fascinating dynamic to work with, is having enemies who can also be friends, who push a plot forward, and it helps them build who they are as characters, because it can show flaws and it can show strengths in the same ways, you know?
I'm sorry. So you said something about the people with like superpowers or something?
Okay, you're not into comic books. I get it.
I know who they are, damn it. Okay. No,
Okay.
so I was just
I wasn't sure. We've never
I
talked about them
really
before.
I really just wanted to like hear your reaction. Like I just wanted to hear you say something like, "What? How do you not know about the X-Men? There's been like
Nope. I was gonna
25
assume that you were.
movies."
I was just gonna assume you were stupid. So.
But what's really interesting about their relationship is that they're basically polar opposites,
Mm-hmm.
right? And anything in life that has such extreme viewpoints, the actual desired truth or outcome is going to be somewhere in the middle,
Right.
right? And so both of them are really flawed. They
Mm-hmm.
both have beliefs that are just unachievable or just undesirable.
Right.
And they're just never getting past that because that's just who they are.
Mm-hmm.
But that is what makes a good character is number one, the character can actually develop throughout the course of the story, or they can be very static, kind of like we were saying earlier, and they can just
Mm-hmm.
say like, no, this is who I am and I'm not changing. That can drive conflict too. And I
Right.
think that's basically what it all comes down to is you're going to want conflict, and there's either going to be some kind of conflict resolution, or maybe another character is going to change to meet that static character somewhere in the middle.
Right. Yeah. I've been dying to bring up Professor X and Magneto in pretty much anything because I love those characters. But yeah, like, this actually ties into the next thing we were supposed to talk about, which is character development. So this ties into things like backstory, motivations, and growth, and leaning into the Professor X and Magneto thing. Magneto has that history of being a Holocaust survivor, where Xavier does not have that experience, and that is a big driving factor in why they look at things so differently.
When we're talking about backstory and motivations, I can't help but think about my story after the plague, because that main character there, Michael,
Uh-huh.
he just got out of control really fast.
Mm-hmm.
So much so that I realized that I was going to have to make an entire series out of it. And then filling out Michael's personality and backstory to that degree made it so fucking easy to tell a story once I actually started writing.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. I read chapter 7, which is actually chapter 12, which is.
We don't need to go into that. I don't know what the first chapter is actually going to be yet. I think it's going to be around chapter 12 is going to be the
Okay.
first one that I release, but
Okay.
I don't know. It's probably going to be sometime later this year.
But anyways, getting back to character development, the backstory in that one is very important to set up the plot, the characters, the understanding of why the characters are the way they are. Very important.
That one, though, you don't really know what the backstory is
No, but you can
or
infer
when
it.
the story actually starts. Yeah, I mean,
You did a good job with that in making it so that you can infer an idea of what the likely backstory is, even if you don't know the full story.
cool. That's kind of what I was going for.
Yeah, like it's a good. I don't know. I just think it's interesting. It's a good way to drop somebody into a story in the midst of everything that's going on without doing a whole lot of exposition and just being like, hey, yeah, this is just kind of how it is. You'll figure it out later.
Cool.
So, how characters change over the course of a story and factors that contribute to that, what do you think is important to focus on there?
It's most interesting to me when characters change due to their own introspection.
That makes me think of Bound Fun. Kelly's gradual acceptance of what's going on.
Yeah, and her ever shifting boundaries.
Yeah, she's so
Yeah.
wishy washy, but it fits.
Well, it's always like taking one step closer.
Yeah,
It's always one step closer.
without crossing the line.
She's always slowly pushing the line forward, going, well, I suppose we've gone this far. Is it really going to be that bad if we push the line just a little bit further?
That's the kind of growth and change that I like in a story, that kind of gradual, it's not that bad if we go a little further, you know? But there still has to be a line. Still has to be a clear line, and she's very adamant about that right up until there's no longer a line.
Yeah, I would say that that line goes away real quick, but
It
she
doesn't.
still has a line though, like right up until the very end.
Mm-hmm.
She was just on the other side of the line, unable to move it.
Yeah. And she doesn't seem to have any regrets about that.
Yeah, I mean, you could say everything works out in the end.
Yeah, I'd say that. But carrying on with that, talking about Kelly having that line that she keeps moving, it gets back to internal, external conflicts in a character and shaping their journey moving forward. That definitely happens with Kelly. She's clearly got some internal, external conflicts going on that is a huge driving force between her interest and her reluctance. So, yeah, I find that really fascinating. You should talk about that.
I thought you were going to say more at the end of that sentence.
No, internal and external conflict, go.
Yeah, well, internal is more fun, in my opinion, because then you have some kind of growth, some kind of character development, right? But external conflict can be very interesting also because then people end up in situations that they have to deal with, and that can be quite entertaining, you know?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Motivations. Let's dive into the motivations that drive characters to act in a particular way.
I'd say that a character's wants and fears and expectations drive most of their behavior.
100%. Their experiences, too.
And then you just need to know what those things are. You know, maybe they don't, have any expectations. Maybe they don't have any wants, or, maybe they have too many. You never really know.
Which is another type of internal conflict.
Yeah.
There's often the choice of do I or don't I, but what if the choice is more than that? Like, do I, don't I, why don't I, should I,
Right.
Some people overthink.
You don't say.
I have no idea what that's like.
It's like kind of annoying sometimes.
I'm positive it must be when you're hearing about it.
You're positive that what?
It must be quite annoying when you're hearing about it, when someone's complaining that they have an inability to make choices.
Okay, I was not expecting that at all. I thought that you were going to say it must be quite annoying when someone says that you think too much.
Oh, yeah, that too.
I mean,
Anyways.
all right, yeah.
So, yeah, the motivations kind of leads us into this whole characterization techniques thing. What are some techniques that you've read by other writers where they've been able to create an incredibly memorable character either through dialogue, description, character relationships, or whatever?
I think some of the most memorable ones have been through dialogue. And those were, I don't know, I think they might have been my characters, actually.
Well, that's okay if you can talk about yours too.
But again, dialogue can be very tricky
Hmm.
because in any medium, dialogue is going to be difficult
Right. At least to get it across naturally.
for sure.
It's very easy to make your characters sound very much alike.
Yeah, just, making the characters sound different. I don't know that I really try to do that much. I think that I pretty much just have them say different kinds of things
Right.
instead of using different words. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for me, it largely depends on what point of view I'm telling the story from. Like, if I'm telling the story in third person, I'm more likely to end up with characters who have different speech patterns, who one might say slang, one might never use slang, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But if it's first person, the dialogue is probably all going to reflect at least some degree of the point of view character's speaking style, because ultimately a first person story in past tense is being retold by the character, which means you're relying on that character's memory, which means they're likely to put their own interpretations on things,
Right.
which is often how you get an unreliable narrator. And I love those.
Right. Well, that's kind of the way my main character is in the story that I'm writing now. He is incredibly unreliable.
I'm looking forward to reading that one then.
Anyway, I think we were saying something about how to create memorable characters.
Yeah.
Description can be okay, but I really prefer that to be told from another person's point of view,
Like physically, the physical description.
physical or even mental.
Okay. So, like the personality and just anything about the character you prefer to be from a point of view that is not the character you're talking about.
Yeah, I don't like a character to think, oh yeah, I always have such a hard time making decisions or whatever. Don't just say it outright. Find a way to weave it into the plot of the story. Show that the character has a hard time making decisions.
I have a hard time with that.
I think I just used that just because you had said something about that earlier. And I was thinking, is she talking about herself?
I am. I think I have a harder time with that when I'm writing in first person than third, because in first person, a lot of the narrative is sort of introspection.
I think that it can depend on if you've got a static character versus a dynamic character.
Yeah, that can play into it for sure.
So in the story that I'm writing now, he's a static character and it's in first person. And
Hmm.
I think that because there's no real growth with him other than just acceptance of ever shifting changes to his lifestyle, right?
Right.
I think that's why it works or why it was so easy to write.
Yeah, that happens sometimes. It just kind of flows that way.
As far as character relationships to create memorable characters, other than conflict and having characters that are opposites, what else is there?
Well, you can have the driving force of friendship. You can have a really horrible character who has a really good friendship with somebody, and that can completely change the interpretation of the character by just seeing that person interact with that friend. That can absolutely add some depth to a character. Is say you have a character who is through three-quarters of the story, they're just this horrible bully. And then at some point toward the end of the story, the main character sees this person who's been absolutely horrible with a friend, and it comes to light that maybe they are this horrible to other people because it is a self protection coping mechanism where they feel like they have to distance themselves from people because they need to appear stronger than they are. And that can be a really big character development point where you have this character who knows this information, knows they're, secretly a big softie, and they could bring that to light, or they can keep the person secret and let them continue to be a horrible person. My hope would be that they would confront them and tell them that, knock it off basically, and tell them to,
Yeah.
get therapy or something. But
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose there might be softer ways of going about that.
yeah. But I mean, if this person has been horrible to the main character throughout, I think they have a little bit of leeway of being a bit of a dick back when they find out that they actually have genuine emotions that aren't always putting themselves up on a pedestal and knocking other people down, you know? But actually, you mentioned characters' description and describing themselves and all that stuff. And that actually brings me to something that is a little bit, I don't want to say controversial because it's not, but it's kind of a big debate between authors. There are some authors who believe that if you do not lay out an entire description of who your character is, either emotionally, physically, or preferably all of the above, then you're being a lazy writer.
What are you talking about?
Like if you don't describe what they look like, their motivations, their personality, if you leave it vague, if you let people read between the lines, if you don't spell it out to the nth degree, then you're being a lazy writer. I disagree.
And those are actual human beings?
Those are actual human beings. They exist. And that's how they feel when they read. It's like they're reading and looking for these things.
Okay,
Where I
well,
think it's,
I don't think that we're going to piss anyone off that's still listening at this point if we say that
if we say that.
to hell with what those people think because they're wrong.
Yeah, that leads into what I was going to say. In that,
Because honestly, and none of those people are still going to be listening at this point in the
no, they
podcast.
gave up like way earlier.
They gave up in like
That
the
is not a
first
character.
like 60 seconds.
Yeah.
They're like, what? Analysis and discussion of things that should just be told explicitly? No thanks.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, they totally dipped out in the first minute.
But yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that that is extremely limiting. I do not do it. I prefer letting people read between the lines because I don't think my readers are stupid, you know?
Yeah. So I haven't really been writing for that long,
Right.
and I just found that it was kind of difficult to describe a character without doing that sort of cheap way of just saying,
Right.
"Hi, my name is Tom, and I'm 6'2", and I'm married to my lovely wife Cindy of 10 years. And oh, by the way, she has red hair, 36 C's, and man, she looks great in high heels." You know?
Yeah. That is a learning process because that is, I mean, to me, it's a crutch to write a character that way. It's easy, it's not imaginative, and it's looking at the reader as if they cannot read context clues.
Right.
There are ways to say all of that without saying any of that.
Yeah. People do that in everyday life. When you're
Yeah.
having conversations with other people, they aren't telling you what they're actually thinking. You have to pick up on that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a life skill.
It's like, if it's a part of life, then shouldn't you be putting your life into your art? You know what
Right.
I'm saying? Because your art requires suspension of disbelief, right?
Right.
And that's gone if you let the reader know that it's not real. It just kind of feels like the invention of lying. Have you ever seen that movie?
No, I haven't.
Basically, it's about a world where basically nobody lies.
Fun.
They don't even know what a lie is. And then one day, for the very first time, somebody tells a lie. And he doesn't even know how to describe it after the fact because he's talking to his best friend. So he's like trying to explain. And then he starts doing more and more incredible lies. First, he says that he has $1,000,000. And then he says that he's a woman. And then he says that he just ate a bicycle for lunch. It's like more and more extreme. And every time his friend thinks, oh, wow, that's amazing.
Because he expects it to be true. Yeah.
Yeah. There's this very objective way that the characters in that movie go through their lives where they're just looking at everything and they're just describing it as if it's just devoid of all feeling, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how it reads when a story starts out like, hi, my name is Tom, and I'm 35 years old.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. To me, that leans heavily into the porn side of erotica. It's just, I don't know, reaching out to the lowest common denominator as far as this is what we want you to imagine. And so we're not going to give you any room to make inferences of your own.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if this isn't your type. This is what this character is.
Right.
I don't like that.
And that really drives me nuts sometimes too, because you'll have writers that they won't have it categorized as like some kind of fetish or something, but then you'll have like a perfectly normal story with a great plot, characters that you can believe in. And then
Mhm.
all of a sudden, there will be some physical description where the girl says something like, "Yeah, well, promise you won't make fun of my nipples." And then it turns out she has like basically like 2-inch like dick nipples like sticking out from her chest. And then the guy's like, "Oh, these are the most amazing things I've ever seen in my life." And then he starts sucking on them, and then it's just like, should this be in gay male? Maybe, I don't know if this is in the right section.
It sounds like it would probably fit into fetish because I
Yeah,
mean,
definitely. That's like some 1 in a million, maybe even 1 in like 100 million type thing. Like, why is this in erotic couplings? This goes in. This should just not just go in as like straight erotica. You know what I'm saying?
hmm yeah, there are definitely some categorization issues with some erotica
Yeah,
in a lot of ways because that's another whole episode of this. So yeah,
yeah. But sometimes I will do character description, but
I do very minimal.
I'm not going to dump it on the reader
No,
at the very beginning of the story.
right,
It will be piecemealed.
right.
There was actually one very interesting book that I read where there was this just dump of a character's physical description very early in the story, and it actually worked. Interestingly enough, it was written by Hugh Laurie.
Huh.
House,
Uh huh. I know who he is.
from the show House, and Jeeves and Wooster and
Uh huh.
Blackadder and all that. Yeah,
Fry and
so
Laurie.
yeah, Fry and Laurie. Yeah, that's God. I need to watch that again. Yeah, so he wrote this book called The Gun Seller, and there's like a page and a half description or something about this one character in the story. And I think it was like some, villain character. And he spends like an entire paragraph talking about this guy's nose. And it's just incredible because it doesn't feel forced. You know what I'm
It
saying?
flows.
Yeah.
I have to read that then because I have never seen an info dump like that done well.
That's like the only one that I've ever seen.
And I like Hugh Laurie, so
But I'll talk about character traits through dialogue
right.
and actions and thoughts, right? But I don't really like to do it through narration or even really other characters' dialogue,
hmm
especially in the first few paragraphs of a story, right?
Right.
Because it just feels so forced. It feels
Well,
so
like,
forced because like I was just reading this story earlier and I was going to recommend it as one of the reviews for this week,
uh-huh.
and then it was definitely under like the first 1,000 words, and you've basically got two people that are meeting for the first time, surprise, and
I'm shocked.
within like 300 words, one of the characters is saying something like, "You certainly do look like you work out a lot," and it's like, oh fucking please.
That actually leads into something I was wanting to talk about. Even when a character's description matches my own interest in another person, I find it boring when it's laid out.
Oh yeah, yeah. What's exciting, what's interesting, is the mystery.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically not knowing.
Mm-hmm.
That's exciting. Not knowing what's
Right.
going to happen.
And it's just like, okay, the thing about me with physical descriptions is I am the type of person who is more interested in a person's personality than their physical shape or traits, which is,
Very pan.
yeah, it's something a lot of people don't really understand. They're like, what do you mean you like personalities? I'm like, I mean, I don't really care what somebody looks like as long as I can interact with them and get along with them and I find them fascinating.
Yeah.
That to me is more interesting and more appealing than someone who is like perfectly shaped to my specifications. Which is not to say I don't have preferences physically, because I do, but like they don't matter as much as a person's personality.
Well, I mean, everybody's going to have their own preferences.
Right.
I can't say that anybody would be right or wrong for that, but I can say definitively that you're wrong if you do a personality trait dump at the beginning of a story.
Yeah, it's the same problem. It's the same problem. It's too much information, not enough showing how you came about that information. There's no mystery to it. There's no interest. There's no reason to keep reading.
Right. You know what's really bad about that is that it gets people to dip out really early if they aren't interested in this very specific personality that they've created,
Right.
right?
Or body type. It works the
And
same way.
or or body type, yeah, I guess that's actually more
Both. I mean,
common. Yeah, well, actually, I guess probably what the most common thing is who the character is, who their spouse is, and how old they are, and the physical descriptions. That's
mhm.
probably the most common thing.
I was going to say, you actually mentioned something that I wanted to talk about a little bit more. You mentioned something earlier. You said something like they're a perfect C or something like that. And that is a pet peeve of mine
Perfect
because there's
C.
like, as in C cup,
Oh, yeah, okay.
that is a pet peeve of mine because there is no such thing. It all depends on the volume of the cup and the bandwidth working together.
Okay, so like I definitely didn't say the word perfect. I'm pretty sure that I said 36C.
You might have, but either way, there's no such thing as being a perfect 36C. Like there, you can say that she's currently wearing a brand and style where a 36C fits, but that's not universal across all brands and styles.
Right. And then you can also say, well, she can wear a 38B or a
Right.
34D.
Sister sizes are a thing,
Yeah.
and it all depends on the style, the make, the brand, and even sometimes the fucking color of a bra.
Oh,
Like
shut the fuck up. The color?
the color. You can get the same bra in a style, like the exact same size, exact same band size, cup size, style, brand, and in a different fucking color, and it fits different.
Let me guess. Is it fucking black?
Or red or blue. White fits different than any of those, and they fit different between each other. I don't know why, other than there is no universal measurement size that people go with, and some brands are trying to cut corners, and I don't know. I don't know. It just drives me nuts. Even with things like women's clothing in regular jean sizes and stuff, we don't have measurements that are inseam waist size like guys' jeans tend to have. We have these arbitrary numbers that, again, can vary from
Yeah.
brand to brand.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say, like, if your character is a size 8 in what? Is that their dress size in this particular brand? Is that their jean size in this particular brand? Or those are the kinds of things that drive me nuts. Those are not descriptors. Those are just,
Those are just,
those are crutches.
yeah.
Those mean nothing.
Those are really very lazy. I don't touch that stuff at all.
Yeah, and please don't ever do that.
I would never, ever,
Yeah, nothing gets me to dip out of a story faster than that.
I would never say he was a respectable 8 inches. God, that's just so,
Cringe?
just, God, yeah. What is it with fucking 8 inch cocks? Is anyway,
I
huh?
don't know.
What is it with them?
Your guess is as good as mine.
I just want to know what is the obsession with a fucking 8 inch dick over a 7 inch or a 9 inch? Why is eight the magic number that everybody
I
goes
don't
for?
know.
It's crazy.
Probably because it's not quite double the average, so it's not gonna
The average
upset
is
a lot of people. It's something like 5.5 or something like that.
the average is oh, okay.
So it's like
Well,
over the average. It's above average without being porn star size. I don't want to talk about this.
I don't like doing any measurements at all because again, like it kind of gets into like even hair color and height
Yeah, there's so many different
and
shades and
stuff
shit.
like that. I prefer to like tell all of those things through
interactions and such.
Yeah, like, yeah, I don't know, you don't weigh as much as I thought you would, or something like that. But like, I wouldn't have any character say, "Oh well, I weigh 105," or "I weigh 92 pounds, but normally I'm 93." Like, what the fuck is that shit?
Yeah, that is again something that could be vastly different on different people.
Yeah.
What, say, even a straight 100 pounds looks like on
Well,
different people.
based on your height, yeah.
Not only that, your
And
muscle
then there's
tone,
also, yeah, that too. Yeah,
muscle tone,
for
and
sure.
your torso versus leg length. If your torso is longer, you're probably going to be like a little thinner at 100 pounds than if your legs are longer.
Yeah.
So, like,
And then
all of that
muscle weighs
matters.
more.
Yeah. Well, it's muscle is more compact, so the same weight in muscle, like a pound of muscle, is going to take up less mass than a pound of fat. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
It's more condensed.
Hmm.
But yeah, all of this is like physical description. Like we could probably do like a whole hour on physical description alone. But yeah, for me, personality is way better than physical descriptions. I like to get to know a character. I don't really care what they look like. They could be my absolute ideal physically, and it's not going to matter to me as much as who they are as a person, like who they are as a character, what they can do, what their interests are, that kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. I've read stories where I don't even really know what the characters look like unless it's repeated quite a few times.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually find that I don't want to get a description of them because I want to have my own idea of what they look like,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, that is my preference too. I like to imagine. I like a writer who gives enough detail to let me put a physical description on this character, whatever that physical description may be. I could easily probably read most stories and put my own likes onto those characters, but I never do. It matters how they interact will shape how I picture them.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure why. But like it just changes cuz I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess because I'm not that attracted to like physical descriptions and, particular traits on a person's body. I guess I just mentally generate an image from a personality.
I normally shy away from that a lot, but there have been times where I've felt, I guess, kind of compelled to do it just because maybe I just think like, nobody's gonna read this. When there's like
Hmm.
no description of like what they look like, really. You know what I'm saying?
And that is something a lot of new writers lean on,
You mean,
thinking that nobody's going to read it if there's no description. Like that is something that I think a lot of early writers think is a thing, but I don't think it's as prevalent as we think it is. I think there are a lot of people who are like us and just prefer to use our imaginations to picture what a character looks like. And I think we should trust our readers a little bit more.
so you're not talking about some kind of data dump at the beginning of the story. You're talking about like even throughout the story.
Yeah, not as, I mean, every now and then I'll drop information as to what a character might look like. Like I have a tendency to give my female characters red hair because of reasons. And and sometimes I end up saying something about that, but usually I think probably for every story that I do include that, I probably have one or two that I don't. I mean, for fuck's sake, I haven't even named some of my characters.
I can do description as long as it's not a dump at the beginning of the story. Actually, there was this one time that I wrote a story that was basically kind of like body worship, I guess you could say. Because I wanted to see if I could do that in a way that wouldn't be cringe.
Well, with something like body worship, that's going to be a pivotal point of the story. That's somewhere where that needs to happen. There's no getting around it there. You
Yeah.
can't body worship without a body to worship? Yeah, I think that's one of those outlier types of stories where, like I said, there the physical description is basically the plot. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't get around that. So there are obviously places where that is important, but in a general story where you have two strangers meeting for the first time and then, finding a reason to fuck.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter so much unless it,
Yeah.
like, unless you want it to. And for me personally, I'm not going to harp on a writer who does, but it definitely detracts for me, and I'm more likely to dip out of that story than I am to read it.
Yeah.
I actually was reading one earlier that I really liked until it got to the bra size being mentioned, and I'm like, fuck, and I'm out.
Yeah.
Because it's like that just kills the flow for me. It just, I don't know, it just comes across as so contrived.
There is this one story though. I mean, I loved the plot. It was a little less than 10 chapters total.
10 chapters.
It really did start out great. Like the first couple of chapters was like, very specific about a certain type of plot. But then after the first couple of chapters, things began to progress from there. And it's like, okay, that's fine. There's going to come a point in time where things have to change a little.
Mm-hmm.
That's totally fair. But then it was a very intriguing series. I read it all the way through to the end. Probably at least 80,000 or maybe 100,000 words.
Mm-hmm.
But what was so fucking annoying was there was one character who was blonde.
Okay.
And God, every like 500 words, the author was referring to her as the beautiful blonde. He kissed the beautiful blonde, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
It was always the beautiful blonde instead of her actual name that I can't even remember because all I remember is the beautiful blonde. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it was a basic description that got carried away, kind of overtook the story in a way.
Yeah, it really did. It got to a point where it was very lazy.
Yeah, I had that happen tonight with a story I was reading, but it was a name.
Mm-hmm.
I was enjoying the story otherwise, but it really suffered from name fatigue.
Yeah.
So I think the name was used like at least twice to 3 times per paragraph, which really sucked because I liked the story otherwise.
It's really very simple. Use a character name at the beginning of the paragraph. For the rest of the paragraph, say he or she.
Yeah, and only talk about that character.
Yeah.
Unless they're interacting directly with the person.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Let's go back to the importance of well-developed characters in storytelling. I have something I want to say on this, but I want to know if there's anything that you want to say on this too. Okay, so what I wanted to say is that a good character can make up for a bad plot. The opposite isn't always true. It can be true, but it's not always true. A good character can make up for a bad plot, but it can't completely undo it. When a character stands out from the rest of the story in a good way, that's a good thing. And it gives people something to latch on to, even if the story itself isn't that great. It can be a good starting point for a new author to build on and learn. If you have one really good character, you can develop that into better plots and better plots. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
It can be easier to start with a really good character and then build yourself almost universe around them where the plots maybe get better and better because you're trying and repeating it. Whereas if you have a single plot and you're trying to always work the characters out, that is not going to look as interesting. It's going to look like you have one story and you're just retelling it with different people.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if you have that one character and you can work on changing the plot and putting them into better and better plots, that can look like character development, even when the reality is you're developing your style and your story and your writing experience.
Agreed.
Is that all you have to say?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, we should probably be wrapping this up, shouldn't we?
Okay then, well.
So that's going to do it for this week. Thanks for listening. And if you made it all the way to the end, make sure to follow the podcast so you can get notifications on future episodes. Also, be sure to check out our work on inkandecstasy.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.